Hello and welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris.
And I'm Eric.
And joining us as always are good friends, Billy and Mark. Hey guys.
What is happening?
So today we're going to be talking about character creation. This is a really close topic to our hearts because there's so many different ways to slice it. But today we wanted to just share our different perspectives, different approaches on how we create our characters so that you can take away something for your tables, your games, and just kind of level up that experience. So Eric, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of a rundown on your general approach to character creation, or maybe some of the changes you've made, some of the ways you've grown from, when we started playing, 10 plus years ago to the stuff we're doing today?
Yeah, my character creation style has definitely grown. When we started, I was mostly I would say that my main experience with something like Dungeons and Dragons, like role-playing games, would be World of Warcraft. So the first character I ever made was a game that Billy ran on Roll20, and I wanted to be a rogue. And I wanted to turn invisible, I wanted double daggers, I wanted to backstab people. I wanted to play a rogue from World of Warcraft, basically. And there was no character behind it, and I'm not sure if I even had a backstory. And then I found out that you can't turn invisible. You have to sneak and can be seen anyway. And all of the things that probably a lot of people have come into Dungeons and Dragons and realized, oh, this is different from just what I'm used to. So I kind of evolved from that a little bit to more looking at the cool mechanics. I would look at different classes that I'm like, oh, that seems neat. I want to do that in a game, and it's still mostly combat oriented. Making a shadow monk because they can teleport between different shadows on the board, and that seemed cool, and they could punch things and do some crowd control and all of these things. So I made a shadow monk for Curse of Strahd, which also had almost no personality. I feel like it took me several generations and several characters before I realized. I guess the realization I had was that if I make a character based on the class, I'm almost always going to be wanting to play another class, because they're all cool and they're all fun, and the more you read about it, you're like, ooh, I want to play that. So I was never really happy with the characters I was currently playing, because I was just playing classes. I wasn't playing a character. So I would always want to play another class and play a different class, and on and on and on. And it took a while before I reached probably my current MO, which is I try to think of a character first and then figure out what class fits. And we've played games where I've even switched the class because a new book came out and another class was more suited for the character I was playing. And it changed zero things about the character, but it just gave them tools that made more sense for what they would choose. I feel like that's probably close to a lot of our journeys, but that's definitely mine.
Yeah, I think just especially having the levels of growth over those years, kind of starting off from the very beginning and coming from a different background and perspective like MMOs, and wanting to translate that somehow into your game experience. And I think for a lot of people that coming in from video games into tabletop role playing, because there's been such a huge insurgence. There's an insurgency of role playing players. With the surge in popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, people have their experience is going to be video games first, right? If you started D&D, way long ago, video games weren't as sophisticated as they are, so you had to really use your imagination, and you didn't have those types of game experiences to kind of pull from as much. Whereas now it's just a different landscape with what's available to us. But having those kind of generations of growth where it's first, I just want to play video games in this new, different setting. Now I want to focus on creating cool classes and mechanic combinations for combat. And then kind of that peak of that evolution is, what story can I tell with this character? But I'm also curious, what's, as we've gotten to that point together, what's the next evolution from that? I mean, you can kind of trace this arc of growth, right? Once you get to that like role playing and storytelling, and also like we're not saying that's the best way to play or the right way to play. It's just the way that our personal preferences. Some people really like tactical simulation, but if you are a role playing player and a storytelling type of player table, what's that next? What can you strive to grow to after that?
I think if you're trying to make that transition from making a character that's that's video game like, or that's tactical or anything like that, to making a character that is actually a character that just happens to have these skills that he could use in his toolbox, I think one of the best ways to start is to relook at the flaws that are when you make your character. Like, don't think about a flaw as just something you have to make. Like, which one that'll not be that bad or anything like that. Because in all story making, like, flaws make character. Characters are, a sum of their flaws, and that is how you create an actual character from your PC. Like, even if it's a character that you created it using the template, and you didn't have a character in mind when you created this, a personality in mind when you created this character. How to give them a personality is like, look at their flaws and think about, like, if this is their flaws and this is their ideals, like, what type of person would have those flaws, and why would they have those flaws? Why would they have those ideals? And then kind of create a backstory based on those. Mm-hmm. I think I would say, like, the transition, like, that's one of the easier ways to make your character feel more, I wouldn't say real, but just feel more like it's not just a stat block with a name.
Yeah. I think I also, the first like 3 or 4 characters I rolled were just like pure heroes. Like, that was my mindset. Like, oh, I'm the protagonist, obviously. So like, I would pick the weakest flaw or something that I was, probably just to kind of streamline stuff for myself.
My biggest weakness is that I'm too strong.
Right. It's like going in for a job interview. I just work too hard. That's my problem.
I'm too detail oriented.
But that totally, now that you're saying that, it totally makes sense, because I would have a hard time having like role playing anything or doing anything except essentially like contradicting somebody and be like, oh no, I'm like the lawful good one, so I will always try to push that point or whatever. And now I'm more like looking at the flaws, because that's what's going to be backstory. And like we talked about previously, I think, like, you don't have to have all of that necessarily worked out or exposed in the story, but it just helps you make some decisions.
Yeah, and that decision making, I think, is really important, because flawed protagonists, flawed heroes are infinitely more interesting than, cookie cutter perfect protagonists.
For sure.
Like, vanilla Superman is probably one of my least favorite heroes, just because he's just like too good. It's not.
Yeah, and I think that is part. I don't know if it's a problem, but I think it's definitely like an evolution of players coming to these types of games from video games, because video game protagonists don't have flaws. They are the best at whatever they're supposed to be doing. Otherwise, the story would be about somebody else. So like, we don't know what Mario's flaws are. We just know that he stomps Goomba heads real good. So like, when you're thinking of like, ooh, I want to play D&D, so I want to basically play a video game that's infinite. We can do anything here. And you see that represented, I guess, in a lot of different ways. People want to seduce barmaids. They want to rob random people. They want to steal from their teammates. Like, a lot of people just don't know what to do with the freedom when they're first given it, because these are things that like maybe you wanted to do in all of these video games, but couldn't. And I think the same goes for character creation. Like, when you're in your Fallout character design, it doesn't ask you like, what are your flaws? Like, it might ask you, what are your weaknesses? Like, are you weak to radiation or whatever? But it doesn't, you don't like build a character normally.
Yeah, the backstory.
Yeah. So like we're not good at it when we start this. It's something that we have to work on if we want to. You know, some people just never want to, and they're happy with that like infinite video game, or aren't exposed to even the idea of, you know, playing a game this type of way where we have a whole session where we don't fight anything and we just talk in a hotel room.
Yeah. And which again, like more often than not, those are my favorite sessions when that happens, because the time just flies by. My question that I want to get your perspectives on is, what are some ways that you can bring those flaws into your character without maybe like overselling it, or in a way that's not going to grate or just feel like you're trying to tug on the limelight a little bit? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you use those things to kind of portray your character in a way that's authentic to them without, you know, while being respectful to the table?
Yeah, I think that is hard. Because some of these flaws, I'm trying to find like a full list of them, and some of them are like homebrewed ones, but some of them are like very, very big, and some are very small, and it can be kind of hard to internalize them. I want to pull up Levo's. What was her flaw?
Yeah, that's a good point though. Like big and small, I think having flaws that are more general allows you to manifest them in different ways throughout that character's journey or their story.
Yes. Normally for really every one of the like personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, I try to find more than one if I can. Like if it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of my flaws, and they are many.
Exactly.
I don't just have one flaw.
Not just one flaw. So Levo's her flaw was people who can't take care of themselves get what they deserve. And like there really wasn't a way to present that in the game. So I tried to think of like other flaws, like she can't read. You know, she's not like great at, you know, just other things that like, what would this, especially after playing a couple sessions, you learn the character a little more, so you can add more like nuance to it.
Going back to when you said there wasn't a way to maybe present this. If you were confronted with the choice, like, hey, this person needs help, would Levo make the decision on her own? Like, no, I'm not going to help you. You can't take care of yourself. You don't deserve my help. The professor was stabbed by an imp and was like poisoned, and Levo chose to help. I guess it's interesting with the paladin, because like paladins are kind of meant to be helpers.
I know. I dry rolled this character, so I just like randomly rolled everything. So it's not, I wanted to see if I like take the challenge and see if I could play to all of these.
Yeah.
If I were to build a paladin, I wouldn't have it look like this at all. And I actually like struggled with
Levo.
That. I liked it. It ended up being a fun character. It was hell on my voice. But I kind of like the idea that like she's a paladin, but not in like the English sense, you know, like she's a paladin from the swamp, from like a tribe. Like they just have like different, they just fit into like their society different than what we think of like paladins do in, you know, like kind of, we'll say civilized society for like lack of a better term, but like the city societies. But I did at the end of that, like I kind of struggled with it. I'm like, he's helpless. He lost to this little imp. Like she wouldn't help him. But I kind of go back and forth with this. Like I don't want a character that doesn't want to play.
Right. That's the other, like, you don't want to back yourself into a corner.
Yeah, but like, well, I do nothing because he's weak, and then you guys have to be like, but you have the flower that can help him. And be like, yeah, but he's weak, and like, I don't know. I don't think that's. I think that's very hard to make fun. It can be, you know, like convincing a character to do something can be fun, but it was, I don't know. It's tough. So like, I will admit I did not play to that flaw almost ever, because I don't know if she would have even like taken the, and that's the thing, like I don't know if she would have taken the thing in the first place, you know, right. Like she'd be like, find the book your damn self. Like, well, I got other stuff to do.
For me, it kind of falls into a spectrum too. Like it's like same thing with alignment. You might be lawful good, but within lawful good, there's nuance there too on what they may or may not do.
Yeah.
And making those decisions kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility as a player. But I think for me, it doesn't happen all the time. Just like, you know, Eric, you said, like you could have gone either way on that, and you went the way that would facilitate the storytelling, which I think is always a good choice as like a default, whatever is going to help move the story along.
Yeah.
But for me as a player, and especially, I think it's especially true for this campaign where like Tesla is probably one of the most fleshed out characters I've been able to play with. Having those things, when it's challenging to make those calls and you just do them, even though it's just like what you don't want to do as a player, those circumstances don't happen as often, but when they do, I feel like I'm really truly enjoying the game in those moments because go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes the most fun things are when something goes wrong and you know as a player that probably was going to lead to, you know, it being wrong, but it just was like not, it's something that your character would do. So like I agree that like if you are chaotic, even or you're just chaotic neutral or lawful neutral, you're not going around and you just think like, okay, what's every law? I'm going to do the opposite. Like I'm the antithesis of the hero in that I will do every action opposite of what a hero would do. And that's not like, you just have your priorities. So I think that your flaws, your ideals, all that stuff, it's how you prioritize what you're doing in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if it was, you know, if there was a character that, you know, that Levo, we were all fighting together, and there's a character that has been fighting very, very strongly and was knocked out, and then a character that's been missing constantly and just hasn't been rolling good, and then they got knocked out. Like Levo would be like, well, I'm like, this guy was doing good, you know, he fought an honorable fight, and he was, you know, he deserves to be healed, while this guy was, you know, unworthy warrior, and so I will heal him after, you know, like, so it's
Yeah.
It's about how you do, you know, you prioritize your actions and that. And I think that that's a good way to do it, and where you're not forced to do something bad. Although like sometimes that is like, if it's a big decision, it's kind of fun. Like if this one game I played, we were fighting a demon that was like, well, we were fighting a group of bad guys, but they had like subjugated a demon by shackling him, and the demon of course like promised like, if you free me, I'll help you and all this other stuff. And I was playing somebody that their character would be like, I'm wanting to be famous, that's my number one job, is to be famous, and to do this would lead to that. Like that was his whole priority. So he unshackled the demon, and of course shit got real bad, and everybody yelled at me in, you know, in game, or not in game, you know, cross table, like, why did you do that? I'm like, I know it was a bad idea, but this is something that like, it was one of those times where it was impossible for my guy to avoid that temptation. That temptation was putting to the game. You know, they designed it, and most characters would be like, oh, obviously like the paladin would, but like if that's like, it is so specific to like my character to be like, well, I guess he would do it, and it would make the game like, it would anger the rest of the party, and it did. And it didn't, and like, it wouldn't have just angered the you know, my friends that are playing the game, but their characters would have been mad at me, and I would have suffered consequences by them. They may not have helped me the next time, or something else like that. Like I felt that was something that was worthy to do. I didn't want to just be like, well, I know this is the wrong thing to do, so I'm going to somehow justify doing it. Like have the decision made first, and then justify why your character would do that. It seems kind of backwards. That's, you know, that's when I think of metagaming, and it's like, okay, what do we need to do? How do I get my character to do that? When you think of your character, it's like, your character knows your goals, but he also has different goals, different priorities. Like, is your character's priorities, you know, fulfilling this one mission, or being rich and famous? Like, what is higher priority, and which one would he place like his actions on that? And so,
yeah, you got to take their goals into account.
Yeah.
And with that, you know, so in the moment at the table, I'm sure people were really mad, but like, if you let those stories play out, you also have a cool chance of like redemption arc. You know, you have a cool chance to tell even more stories. And that's real character growth. Like, did your character give into temptation or resist it? And what cool stories are there able to be told from there? I recall the time where we were venturing through the Tomb of Anauroch, and we lost all of our equipment, and that made the game a lot more challenging, but also, you know, a lot more fun because there was a lot more at risk. So
Yeah, and
you gotta see the bigger picture sometimes too.
I agree. And I was one of those people that was angry, not at the demon game, but at the Tomb of Horrors game, at Billy for losing all our stuff.
It's rash decisions. That's what he's a paladin. He thinks that he's holier than thou. I just like that's the kind of guy that he was. He was a stuck up, he was your frat boy paladin. And that's kind of the thing. He would charge forward always first. Just charge forward because, he's never really faced real adversity. So why would he think that anything would go wrong for him?
Yeah,
I think that kind of thing also, might depend on your table. Like you might have been like, well, I can kind of push it a little bit because we've played together. Where if I was at like with a brand new group, which is probably maybe a little too meta, but like I might not unshackle the demon with new people.
Yeah.
Just to keep things more copacetic, but like we all know that we can get over, table stuff or whatever.
That's a good
But,
point
like,
though. Know your audience.
And the other thing with Bill is like I know you make stuff super interesting because of that. Like you will bring in the flaws, but at the same way you don't treat alignment as just like this monolith that has to be stuck to. You also don't do it with flaws where you're like, I'm going to break every law. I'm going to, it's like, and I think that totally makes sense because in the same way, when I go to make a decision, I don't necessarily be like, what are my personal ideals? I don't go, what are my flaws? I should react that way. That's more of kind of a gut moment.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I'm playing, I bring in the flaws. It'll just pop in my head. I don't know. It's like, oh, like there's an opportunity for like Houdini. His is like, it's not stealing if I need it more than someone else, which I thought kind of fit with just, roguish mystery. But, it's like, I don't necessarily go into every situation being like, does he need that? Should I steal it? Because people don't approach their own lives thinking of their flaws first either. Got to be like a mixture. And I think you do a good job of that.
A criminal doesn't do 20 crimes a day. They may only do 2 crimes ever, but if they're big enough crimes, they're a criminal.
And some criminals are masterminds, and some are opportunists. You know what I mean? Like I'll steal the bike if it's unchained, but I don't carry around a giant pair of metal clippers to bust open padlocks.
Yeah, there's a lot of gradients, which I think is really cool.
I think so, and I agree with it that like your flaw needs to be kind of just in the back of your mind. You don't need to like compare every action, but just in the back of the mind, knowing it. Like for when we like the last game with Cammy Rainbow, she didn't trust the church. She did not trust like church and academics. She thought that they were very selfish. And that is why when she went through the gate, she was adamant that they keep it open. Like that was her flaw was she did not trust them. She knows that they're like, even if it's not malicious, they are very laser focused on their own, work and their own ideals, and things can get lost in the shuffle. And so that's why like that little thing of, could you make sure that this portal stays open? I would really like it if you did. Like, that's it. Like, that was, I think, the only time in the whole game that flaw came into effect.
That was really cool, though, because it put me on the spot quickly as a DM, because I hadn't even thought of anybody, like, doing that or requesting that or not wanting to go through to do the mission. I had been focused on other stuff. So that was really interesting, because, like, I had to, like, kind of figure out a way to assuage your character's ideals or perspective to make her feel comfortable enough to proceed with the story. So that was just an interesting way that your character's, kind of perspective or ideals or flaws or whatever directly impacted the story and the world around her. So I just think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that I like to look at flaws. I want a flaw that's going to keep me from doing something, and then a flaw that might make me do something. So like Billy said about his paladin, like he's brash, he rushes in. So that's something that's going to like make him do something. That's going to cause an action. I've had So the pirate I played in one of the games that Chris ran, he had several flaws. A lot not even written on his sheet. But one of his flaws is that he was claustrophobic. He was born and raised on a pirate ship in the ocean and open air, and is used to cities. So we never did end up going into a cave or Underdark or anything like that. But if he needed to go into a tight place to like rescue somebody, he may not. He might be too afraid to do it. So I wanted something that would maybe prevent him from helping, and something that would drive him, like those two forces, like a push and a pull. And I think you can have all the little ones, that, because like you said, like no person or no fleshed out character only has one flaw. So you can have several, but I like to have kind of big ones that will push and pull. And like rushing in is perfect. It's such a good character flaw because it drives action.
Yeah, there's also like the opposite, never acts first, or, waits until others take initiative, or, something along those lines.
Yeah, hesitation is definitely, it can at least be a flaw, if that's the way that you're playing it. I wanted to circle back to something Bill was talking about with letting the demon loose. Again, we play a lot together, and our goal now, I feel like, is storytelling. We want to tell a collaborative story. And I guess it pulls into like kind of what Mark was saying. If he was at a new table, he wouldn't do that. I feel like we walk a fine line with those types of like, I'm going to ruin this moment because it's what my character would do. So we walk a fine line of like, this is going to be an awesome story also, or I'm the star and this is what I want to do regardless of how it affects like everyone else's gameplay.
There's the distinction.
Yes. I know that like our motivation would never be like we play enough together that I don't think any of us are like, and we play enough that we don't have like the main character syndrome. But I feel like that's another holdover from video games. Like you're the Dovahkiin, you're the main guy, you can do whatever you want. And that's how you come into this story. And that's, I think, can be a very toxic way. And the actions can be the exact same. A lot of it is intent. But I know a lot of times, like when Bill's, like he described, like this is what my character would do, which is a phrase that I hate because it's usually used to justify like stupid actions. But Bill's thought of his characters enough and like knows them well enough and knows this is going to make this story better.
Yeah, ultimately it needs, like, this is a game that we play for fun. So if I thought that my actions would make somebody have less fun or would like kill somebody's character, I would not do it. Like that is like if I was the healer, like if I was, Levo and somebody was dying, you couldn't just be like, well, I'm not going to heal you. Like the battle is over. There's no consequences of not healing or of healing. And you could just be like, well, I'm not going to heal you because you're weak. Like that is absolutely like, oh, my character would do that. Like, no, they wouldn't. Because there's no reason not, like, you would do it, and then you would just lose all respect for that character. You just be like, and then you'd play the rest of the game, and you would just, like, kind of make snide comments, like, that is how you would play that, so that the intent is kind of the same, like, oh my god, this guy, I thought he was a worthy party member, but he's really just a weakling that we have to babysit. Like, that's the mentality of that character just shifted. And so, because not healing and letting the characters die for no reason would ruin the game. It would kill somebody's character and just ruin the atmosphere of we're a collaborative team here. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I do think that saying, oh, this is what my character would do is a very shitty thing to do.
It's a super slippery slope.
It is a slippery slope that, like, because a lot of times, like, your paladin, if you are, like, and they do it a lot for paladins. Like, oh, my paladin would do this. Oh, he sees a bad guy. Oh, he doesn't care. He's going to rush into it. And you're going to get the whole party, wiped.
Yeah.
He's just going to, have to deal with his own morality of letting the bad guy either win or walk away or dealing with the bad, negotiating with evil. Like, he doesn't negotiate with evil. But this time he was forced to. How does that make his character happen?
Yeah.
Saying, oh, I wouldn't do it.
That's interesting storytelling. That's interesting growth. Yeah. When they do the thing all the time, that's like when they always rush in, okay, that's predictable. But when the time that they don't, oh, now this is interesting. Why? Tell me.
Yeah.
Speaking of
How
which,
do they do it?
yeah, Eric, you've got a method that you've shared before that I really like. That's really helped me, kind of in the vein of what would my character do, or this is what my character would do. Just having, like, when you're in the character creation process, having a list of questions that, you know, in this circumstance, this character would do this, and kind of walking through those, even if it's just a template, gives you an idea of what your character would do in any given circumstance, just by having answered some of those questions. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Eric? Because I feel like that's a good tool to kind of prep yourself. So you don't even have to say, well, this is what my character would do. You kind of know because you've like had a little bit of practice in a sense.
Yeah, I think practice is like the best word. So I actually don't know where the list is, but I made a list of like relatively common things. Like, you come to a locked door. What would your character do? Like, try to pick the lock, kick it in, find a way around. Like, how does your character react to obstacles? And it really does help flesh out on like these things that are relatively, you're more than likely going to run into at least one of the things on this, you know, on this list. But even if you don't run into any of them, you can extrapolate. So just like running this personality you've created, running them through basically some like simulations on different things, like how would they react to this, how would they react to that. It just helps like solidify what they would do in other situations.
Yeah, because I think with characters that I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about, one of the biggest, I guess, maybe pain points for me, or friction points, or things that kind of slow me down, are when they are confronted with this situation, and I kind of default to just like general player mode. What is an appropriate thing as a player to do, instead of, okay, what's this character doing? What are their thoughts and perspectives on this? And what are all these things that are influencing their decision making, and how would they respond? So, you know, having, again, like, I really love just thinking about these general flaws and ideals and personality traits that you can kind of use to apply that kind of push or pull that decision making. I think that's a fantastic way to think of it, Eric. And then being able to use those as a compass to navigate the different circumstances or different situations in a way that's authentic to that character. I think for me, that's the trick, or the play style that I aspire to. So Mark, let's talk about your character creation a little bit.
Yeah, I feel like I'm still figuring it out, like what I like and don't like. I definitely started off, well, actually, I think I first started off by being like, everyone please make characters for me. And then, you know, I definitely jumped into picking a class purely based on like what cool moves I thought I could do. Which I think Eric kind of mentioned earlier. When you do that, it ends up kind of limiting you much more than you realize in a bunch of other aspects. So I focused more on like trying to come up with a backstory now. I definitely like look around to see what other people have done online just to get ideas. And one of my things is definitely using like all the information that I can get. So like I try to take all of my personality traits and ideals and flaws and bonds and all of that and lay that out so that I have kind of essentially like beats in a story that I can start filling in. So it's like, oh, if I'm an urchin, I'm going to pick something that might open an option for me to tell a story. Like, for instance, Houdini, you know, owes his survival to another urchin who taught me to live on the streets, is the bond that I picked. And that just gave me something to be like, okay, so I'm going to change it to be like, the only reason that he's ever even become a magician or has aspirations of this is because a busker was teaching him tricks when he was a kid, and that was impressive. And like, oh, so what street was that? And I can kind of use that as my little seed to make some kind of inspiration for myself to jump off on.
Nice. What are some other ways that you like manifest those things into the game via your character?
I try to like my character sheet, I'm constantly scrolling up and down when we're playing. Like I know what's on here. But a lot of times I'll use any decision I've made previously to inform another decision. So like, for instance, if I have a flaw in my character and I'm debating whether it's a time for that flaw to shine or not, I might be like, well, I don't know, does this character have a lot of wisdom? Because if they do, they might be able to hold their crap together and get, through this interaction without their flaws coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like an official thing. I'm not like rolling in my head or anything. But for me, it's just helpful to have little tiny things, whether it's story that I can pull off of in a conversation, or even looking at my character sheet to try to help me. And I think the more I play, the more comfortable I get doing that on the fly. But I'm still definitely like checking around to be like, what can make this make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's just an ongoing exercise for sure, just trying to figure out different ways to bring those things into the game in a way that makes sense. It's one thing to just, do it and have it. It almost feels just like overacting in a sense, or over role playing, if it's every little thing is dripping with lore from your character sheet. Mm-hmm. So there's that kind of balance, because again, it is Eric said it before, and Billy too, it's a very collaborative game and experience, and we all want to contribute to it. But I think, aside from that, we've talked a lot about those individual characters, but then it's fun to see how the characters and party grows together as well, and the history and memories they create as a group.
Yeah, that's the best part, I think. Because eventually, if you play a character, through a couple games, or even sometimes one, there's times when we've all been hanging out and just randomly, as if we had all like actually done it, we'll be like, do you remember that game with that dragon and that one opportunity of attack that was like just perfect? Which is cool. That's like, real life and gaming colliding, because we all were there. And I also try to keep that in mind, that I want to play the game. And when I first started, I feel like me as Mark wasn't playing as much as my character was, because I was overdoing it. I was trying way too hard to, like you said, have everything have some sort of lore or whatever. But it's like, Mark wants to have a good time. So I needed to find a way to just have some ideas that I could bounce off of without like just locking myself into, like we said before, like all the stuff of my alignment and all of that. Because if you overdo it, I think it can be kind of boring, honestly, because you're not doing the role playing, and as a person, you're not giving yourself an opportunity to like have some creative differences with your character sheet, or like interpret anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up a really good point too, of just getting like, I want to get something out of it too. Like, what are you as the person playing these characters in these games, like where do you get your fulfillment from? And I think understanding that in some way helps kind of determine and dictate what approach you take for building your character. I mean, we've talked a lot and predominantly about role playing, because that's just where we are. That's all of our preferences, I think. I don't want to speak for you guys, but and the way we play, we tend to emphasize the characters, the story, and the interactions that happen within the game, more so than, really difficult, challenging, or tactical combat, or like expansive dungeon crawls, or there's so many styles and ways to play the game. So I think just understanding your personal preference and the preferences of the people you play the most with is helpful, because then, making sure everybody's getting what they need and the group is getting everything that they need just creates games that you look forward to playing. I look forward to our Sunday sessions. Like, I can't wait, because I personally get everything I need out of them and everything that I want from the games. And I hope, for you guys, the same is true. If not, we can have a conversation about that and figure out what we can do to make those better. But yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up, Mark. Maybe that'd be fun to talk about, like, what your personal preferences are in terms of like what do you get out of character creation, or what do you look to achieve with your character creation that lets you have the most fun or enjoyable game experiences?
I really like to pick something for my character that somehow reflects me or like my personal interests. I think that helps me draw it in a little bit better. It helps me understand them a little bit, but also it's kind of fun to have like that thing in the back of your head where and again, I think this is what I was saying before, like part of the game to me is me connecting with the character. So anything like joint interest wise that I can bring into my character's story helps me. Part of that is like having the character being even loosely having something in common with me is fun because I like to just like help out in general. So a lot of times I'll choose characters that have that going for them as well, like a healer or a support player of some sort, which I kind of attribute to range for some reason when it comes to combat.
It's because it's smart.
So yeah, I like having that in my character because it's something that I like in my personal life. So, like I feel like I get a little bit more of like a dopamine hit if I'm like a healer and I can like rush in and revive somebody who's like super badass and they can get back to the fighting. But like necessarily the fighting itself, I enjoy hacking and slashing as well. But like I killed that dog and felt a little bad about it earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a good response.
Like being able to just like have that character that slightly connects to my personality like draws me in more, and also gives me an opportunity to be like, oh, what would I do in this situation? And it just makes it kind of fun to help out in like a crazy dragon fight because I'd never get that chance in my real life.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. I love to play support and helping classes and like to contribute that way. It's just, I don't know. And I think that's why I prefer, I enjoy playing as a player, but I prefer DMing because I feel like the role as a DM is just making sure all of the players at the table are having fun. And I just, like as a DM, you just get to constantly be doing that. Whereas a player, you only jump in at certain parts of the story. So Eric, what same question. What really sparks joy when you're with your characters in game?
Yeah, so the original question was like, what do you look like what are you looking for when you build your character out? And really like when I'm like filling out my sheet, like I want to make a well-rounded character. I want to make a good character. I want to make sure that they can hit more often than not and just things like that. I want to make sure they're proficient. I want to give them spells that make sense with whatever backstory I wrote or whatever type of personality. And I want to make sure they're like utility spells, damage spells, and things like that. I want the sheet to be good. And mostly I want that to be good so that I can focus on like role playing. And part of my evolution, I used to like charisma, unless I was a paladin or a warlock, was a dump stat. Who needs it? And now like almost no matter what character I am, it's my second highest. I think the thing that I have the most fun with is interacting with the other player characters or the other non-player characters, and like talking to people, enemies, barmaids, whatever it is. So I tend to, even if I don't play, what you would typically think of as like the face, like a bard or paladin, I don't know, and it might be a little like hogging the spotlight, and I try to be aware of that when it happens. But I want to talk to people. I want to ask questions. I want to sleuth. I want to like figure out things through dialogue. And that is, I have the most fun doing that. So I do try to build my character around it a little bit, especially just like mechanically. Like I'm going to give myself again, my like second or third highest stat, depending on what class I am, is going to be charisma. It's part of why I really also like warlocks, I guess, because then I don't have to like make that choice. It's like nice and easy, like suck.
Yeah. Bard's also probably a good choice for you too.
Yeah, I've actually, to be honest, not had as much fun. Like the Bard I played in Billy's character or in Billy's game that we'll bring back, I really did have a lot of fun playing him. But it was, I think that character, that personality could have been almost any class.
Yeah.
I think I just like hit a fun personality to play with. It made perfect sense that he was a Bard, but he could have easily been, again, anything. So I don't know. I think I have a little less fun with bards and paladins than I do warlocks, but I'm also just kind of partial to the warlock for like mechanical reasons. I think they're really interesting mechanically. But yeah, the most fun I have is role playing, and like if we can have a scene like you guys had just recently, either in the bookstore talking or in like the hotel just figuring stuff out, like using your skills and talking to each other. Like that's the most fun that I have.
Yeah, no, I'm the exact same way. Billy, what are your sort of buckets that you like to fill in your character creation process, and then like in game, what are the things that really just like you really enjoy with your character?
Kind of a catch-all. It all depends on how I'm feeling, but most of the time I think of I have like a spark of inspiration, which is either I think of a cool person to play, or I see a subclass that I'm like, this could be something interesting. And so I usually find just some sort of spark, and then I kind of have fun making the character around that spark. And it's completely random. It has I don't try to focus on one character type over the other. And then my fun is trying to bring those characters to life. So it could be any character at all. The fun for me is to try to see how they would react in the world. So it does not really matter as long as it's a well-developed character. I'm gonna have fun playing him, and I could probably have fun playing a character that's not well developed. Like if I got handed off a character that somebody else made that's more min-max or focus on something else, because I could kind of try to rework why that character would do that. But I don't know. That's my fun is bringing the character to life, and so the actual stats and the skills like does not matter that much to me. Like Mark Twain is ineffective at almost everything. Maybe talking to people, but he's terrible at combat. He's old. He's bad at a lot of challenges. He can talk to people, and that's basically it. But it's being effective or ineffective doesn't really even matter that much to me. Like if I was bad at everything, like that's a character that I've been thinking about doing, is making a character that's just bad at everything, but his whole goal is to be a hero, but he is not cut out for it. And I've been trying to think about how I would play that guy. He has no stat over, like he's tens all across the board. He is completely average in everything, but he has this delusions of grandeur,
Well, everyone loves an underdog.
Yeah, so it's just I do not know. It's a hard question for me, but I think that just like this, the stat blocks for me doesn't really matter. I use them as I try to figure out what best to apply at the time, but I don't know. It's
Well, you bring up a good point.
I make my own fun is kind of what it is, and I want to interact with the people that I'm with. So like, I've never really played with people that I didn't know that much. There's always been maybe one or two people at a table that I didn't know that well sometimes, but I've always had at least a couple people that I could, play with. So it would be interesting if I was at like a brand new table of all people I've never played with, how that would work. But
that would be fun. You also bring up a good point too, that sometimes you don't always take the same approach when building a character. It could just be like, oh, I'm in the shower and I just thought of this cool idea. The character for the game that you're going to run, Billy, the character that I'm making, I think for Eric, just popped into my head kind of, randomly when I was making different voices and practicing different characters. So you might not always use the same approach. I just think it's kind of fun to understand, at a personal level, you as the player, what are you looking to get out of your characters, as you're playing the game. So I think we've uncovered quite a lot, and that's really exciting because I feel like there's also a lot of things here that I didn't pay as much attention to that I want to start rolling into my characters, like spending more time fleshing out those flaws, the ideals, going through some of those questions, Eric, and maybe we can share that list too and add to that list to kind of help in that character role-playing development. So is there anything that you guys are going to take away to kind of roll into your next character?
Yeah, I do something similar to like Billy, and I think all of us do. Like if I'm trying to like sit down and like I need to make a character, like Billy for the game he's gonna run wants me to make one for Chris to make one for Mark, and Mark to make one for me. So I am sitting down and like, all right, I need to create a character. But a lot of times I do what Billy talked about. Like I will just think of like, ooh, this would be neat, and then like flesh it out from there. And I think about it a lot. So I have a huge long list of ooh, this would be neat characters. And a lot of times they are just like an idea. So using like Mark's strategy of like how, like what do I know about myself? Like what personal things can I add into this character to flesh it out? Because like the old adage, like write what you know, it's kind of hard to know what, like a pirate on the high seas of Faerun, like I don't know anything about that. But I know how I feel and different things about myself and what I'm interested in and what I'm afraid of and what makes me angry. So looking more inward, I think, and adding those types of character flaws and traits to characters, I think will be something that I do a little more of.
Nice. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, and I think I liked what Eric was saying about picking the way he picks classes, and I feel like I definitely take the video game approach. I realize now, which is fun sometimes, but I think I should explore more like classes and stuff that I wouldn't necessarily pick by default, just to expand my horizons a lot.
Nice. Billy?
I may actually go for that average Joe character next, because I've been meaning to do it I just thought it'd be kind of like a funny story of somebody who's not a hero trying to be a hero, and that may be it. I have no idea what class he'd be. I don't think it matters because he's not going to be good at anything. But it's to like challenge myself to make that character not just interesting, because he's going to be interesting from a storytelling perspective from the best, but also it is a game with roles, skill checks, and stuff, and I don't want to just be weighing people down. So try to figure out how to make it where it's not just it's a two-party. We have two people in this party, and then one just weightless meat chunk.
Well, I don't know if he's at 10s across the board. I mean, that still doesn't get like if it was 8s, it might be problematic. But even just having 10s, like there's still a reasonable amount of success. I think the next time you play as a player will be you're running the next game, so it'd be for Mark's session. So maybe if Mark runs a Star Wars campaign, then that would be a fun setting for this average Joe Spacer or whatever the.
Be a Jedi so hard, something like that. He considers himself a hero.
That would be a fun, and to me, like that would be a fun setting because there's a ton of average people that just bumble their way through stories in the Star Wars universe. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm gonna think more about how, like, I'm a very selfish character creator because I think about how it would affect me and what I want to play. So maybe I will think about how my character can add to the general story. So it's a lot of times I'll just make a character and then it doesn't really matter what everybody else is doing. I want to be this character because I think this guy will be fun. So I think I will start thinking about how he adds into the greater storytelling and everybody, how he interacts with other characters before I, as I'm making him, try to design him to be better at interacting.
Yeah, because I think just especially with the tight games that we're playing, there's only 3 of us and we're going through these little short, one shots. For me, the most fun that I've had is both seeing and having these inter-party connections and inter-party interactions as we go forward. And yeah, I just, for me, it always makes the game feel smoother and more fun if I get to enjoy it with the other characters and kind of try and help elevate, make sure the other characters look cool and everyone can shine. That's it for this week's episode on how to take your character creation to the next level. But we're curious what you do to keep your character creation interesting. Let us know in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel at +1togaming.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.